It's time for something a bit more musical, and a bit more relaxed. Let's chill out and go for a drive. Ah yes, few arcade games could claim to be relaxing, but this is certainly one of them. Now obviously it's out one, and it's one that plenty of folks want me to talk about. But here I'm focusing on the music. In particular, how the way that Sega handled music in their classic arcade games helped to change the definition of what video game music actually was through breaking all the walls. And to do that, obviously we have to look at the S.S.T, or Sega Sound Team. I mean, it's a band that plays music from Sega games. What's not to love about it? Anyway, like many good things in life, we start off with 1985's Space Harrier, Sega's first arcade game to use their superscalar technology, and at that time a pioneer. It's a wonderful game, one of the great Yu Suzuki's finest creations. Obviously that scaling, the action and the graphics all stand out, but so does the music. Not just for the sound and the complexity, but for sheer length and different parts. Most video game music at the time was snappy and, crucially, short, so that it could easily be looped over and over. Space Harrier is a different beast, a full song, 3 minutes and 45 seconds to be precise. It shouldn't even work. Hell, you'll never get through a full loop of the song while playing the game uninterrupted thanks to the boss battles, although the game picks the main song up back where it left off for the next stage, which was impressive in and of itself. It has an overarching melody, but also breaks down and builds up again, over and over. A classic bit of music that fits perfectly to the game, one of the many things that made Space Harrier stand out so much. Now, I'm not going to claim that Space Harrier was the first game to feature such a long song as its music. It undoubtedly wasn't. I could point you, just for one example, to some work that Rob Hubbard did on the C64 SID chip in the same year. You know, like this. But Space Harrier was a very notable example in the arcades, especially thanks to the game's popularity, and it wasn't going to be a one-off either. Anywho, as for the man behind the music, his name was Hiroshi Kawaguchi, although he was known in the credits simply as Hiro. All Japanese coders had nicknames then, especially at Sega. Hiro actually joined Sega in 1984 as a programmer, transferring to the sound team not long after. The actual genesis of Sega's new approach to video game music lies in a slightly earlier arcade game, HARTMAN, which Hiro worked a little on, originally as a programmer, but then as a composer. He was playing in another band at the time, and designer Yu Suzuki, who by the way had a big passion for music that went right back to his childhood, asked him to make some songs for HARTMAN that sound like music a band would play. He recorded a demo to cassette, and another employee handled the sequencing. With this, Hiro's destiny was sealed. Space Harrier was next, and the rest is, as they say, history. Hiro is arguably the most prolific of all the members of Sega's sound team, as we'll find out. His next major classic is OutOne, the game that solidified and perfected Sega's approach to game music. It was imperative to the game's creator, yep, Yu Suzuki again, that OutOne be known as a driving game, not a racing game. And one of the key factors to this? Why, picking a radio station, which you do at the start. 3 radio stations match up with 3 different songs, Splash Wave, Magical Sound Shower, and Passing Breeze, all 3 of which were composed by Hiro. Once again, they're long pieces, about 5 minutes apiece, which is approximately how long it should take to complete a playthrough of OutOne. And unlike Space Harrier, the music is uninterrupted by other tracks. The only other music in the game is Last Wave, which appears on the high score screen. OutRun shows just how much importance was being placed on what was previously a bit of an afterthought. Whereas Space Harrier would have been a really good game with or without good music, OutRun likely wouldn't be half the game it is without its music, and how it presents its music. And who boy is the music good. 3 songs with 3 completely different feels, all of which are crucially perfect songs for driving, either here or in real life. Again, it's such an important game when it comes to advancing the definition of just what music could do in a game, and it perfected the formula for Sega that had started with HARTMAN. As good as the work of the composers was, you do have to give a lot of credit to Yu Suzuki for his original vision. Hero continued to do great work. He moved on from this to frickin' Enduro Racer, Fantasy Zone and Afterburner, which goes to show just how amazing he was and is. But he wasn't the only one. Katsuhiro Hayashi, a great man who composed music for a lot of Sega's earlier arcade titles, and Koichi Nomaki, known as Funky KH and Pretty KN respectively, would do the music for 1987's Super HARTMAN, which once again featured a selection of 4 very hard-rocking and very long songs that could be picked from before starting a run, all of which are classics. Outrider Crisis is probably the one that people remember the most, mind you. The same duo would compose the soundtrack for one of Sega's more spectacular arcade games, Galaxy Force. This one's got more of a jazzy fusion type feel, best demonstrated by the almighty Beyond the Galaxy. Later on, Takenobu Mitsuyoshi, aka R. Saburo, would join the fray, starting off by composing the soundtrack to 1990's G-Lock, and moving on from there to the likes of GP Rider and Virtua Racing. He didn't start out in music straight away either. He originally applied to be a part of the company's marketing team before sending his demo tape into the music department and getting accepted in about 1989-1990. These 4 composers made up the core of Sega's sound team, and between them they were responsible for just about all the great soundtracks for Sega's arcade games of the mid-late 80s and early 90s. And they would all be involved in the creation of what was known as the S.S.T Band. Because hell, if you've got all these full-length songs kicking around, the next best thing to do would obviously be to perform them. And so the first incarnation of the S.S.T Band formed in 1988, consisting of Hero and Funky KH on keyboards, Pretty KN, now known as Mickey, on guitar, and Sachio Ogawa on bass. This particular incarnation wasn't quite the full article just yet, and before they did go live there were some changes. Funky KH was replaced by Kimitaka Harrier Matsume. Harrier, husband of Manami Matsume, you know, Mega Man and all that, may not have been the original composer for S.S.T's music, but he was utterly instrumental in arranging it for a live setting. The group then added another guitarist, Juji Galaxy Ijima, a new bassist, Shingo Burner Komori, and a drummer, Takehiko Thunder Tanabe. And with that, the Sega sound team was ready to go live. Sega, of course, were not the only big Japanese studio to have a house band. As a matter of fact, most of them did. Taito had Zuntata, which had been active since 1987. They're probably best known for the Ninja Warriors soundtrack, that I believe was their big debut, Daddy Mulk and what have you. Konami had the Kukeha Club, Data East had Gamerdelic, Capcom had Alf Lyla, and Nihon Falcom had the JDK Band. Virtually all of these bands would go on to release CDs with studio performances of their respective video game soundtracks, and several of them, like S.S.T, would end up going on the road and playing concerts. Not all studios did. Nintendo never had an official house band, and it appears that Namco didn't either. But the ones who did were amongst the first to actually create and sell proper video game soundtracks. While Sega were arguably the first to really get deep into creating extended songs for games that could eventually end up being performed live, it was almost like a big sigh of relief for everybody else, and they all picked up the ball and ran with it at the same time. You can't really just credit the S.S.T Band for this on their own. All of these bands had their say too. The S.S.T Band's live gigs were pretty frickin' awesome, as you might expect. They played live fairly often and at quite big venues to boot. They also released a fair few CDs. It was quite common, not just for the S.S.T but for other house bands, to release CD soundtracks for arcade games that featured both the original music from the game and the house band's live arrangements. It has to be said that the house bands were quite far ahead of the West in this regard. Hell, it might only be very recently that people in Europe and the US have treated their game soundtracks as something more than just utterly disposable and composed by folks who barely even have a credit to speak of. Nowadays our best composers do get a lot of respect, but even that wasn't always the case. It's nice that in Japan they were a lot more visible, and they helped to make the performance of music from video games something of a thing. House bands could even team up where studios couldn't. There's a gig from 1990 where the S.S.T share the bill with Zuntata, and they both tear the house down. As a recording and touring entity, the S.S.T Band had 5 pretty awesome years, albeit with a few changes down the road. The most major one being Hiro's departure from the touring band in 1990 to concentrate on composing for Sega games, replaced by Takanobu Mitsuyoshi. Later on they also created the odd piece of entirely original music, including a 1992 album called Blind Spot. The S.S.T Band continued to release music and play gigs until 1993, when the team surprisingly disbanded. That seems to be a bit of a shame. Right at the time when Red Book audio was becoming even more commonplace, the S.S.T decided to go their separate ways, although the composers themselves would still be working with Sega, by and large. But it was quite a good one, and the members of the S.S.T still continued to do their thing. Hiro continues to soundtrack Sega games to this very day. Saburo's best work was still to come. In 1993 he composed the soundtrack for Daytona USA. And yes, he sang on the soundtrack too. He's that voice on Let's Go Away, Sky High, and indeed Sega Rally's almighty Game Over screen, because he did the music for that game too. On a different note, his soundtrack for Shenmue is also pretty famous. Funky KH no longer makes music, and Mickey was last making music for Konami. But there is a cool epilogue. In 2010 the S.S.T Band reformed under the name of Blind Spot with Matsume, Namiki, Shoji Morifuji, Masato Saito and Hisanori Kumamaru. Blind Spot still play gigs to this day, and some of them are available to watch. They're well worth checking out. So there you have it, pretty much. If you have any interest in video game music at all, and the performance of video game music, then you really ought to check out the S.S.T. There's lots of footage of them playing available on YouTube, and they really do some amazing things with such well-known songs. Even if you've heard songs like Magical Sound Shower, Burning Point and Wilderness so often you could hum them backwards, You really ought to hear the S.S.T do them for something different. These guys were and are a proper live band, not content with just playing the songs entirely as they were in the game, which is one of the reasons why Matsume ended up being so important. Sometimes you make a video because you want to cover absolutely everything about a famous figure, or because you want to tell a bit of a story. Honestly, this video's just here so that more people can check out the awesomeness that is the S.S.T, and indeed other house bands from the period. They're pretty much all fantastic. So why on earth are you still listening to me, huh? Go away already. Not because I told you to, but because Takanobu frickin' Mitsuyoshi told you to. Take it away. Many thanks for watching this video on the story of the S.S.T. If you liked this video, then please consider thumbing it up, subscribing, and supporting my social media, my Patreon, my Facebook, and my Twitter. Okay, time to get my inner Takanobu Mitsuyoshi out and do a little sing-song, oh dear. Martin Pataki, Taylor Almond, Mark Johnston, Twisted Squat, Ian Roberts, Dragon Sixmaster, Joel Hartman, Phil Taproke, Ben Coker, Jamie Hampshire, Tiago Pereira dos Santos Silva, Andre Russell, Leon Norris, Grayson Blackpool, and Olaf Olveen. Oh dear, sorry about that. But thank you to all of you, and indeed thanks to these people: Tim Lintz, Robert Kelly, Johan Eriksson, Stephen Hornsby, Jan Best, Robin Banks, Dan Roscoe, Terry Anderson, Francisco Pimenta, Kev Gilmore, Alexander Green, Thomas Daniels, Greg Olson, Christian Earnshaw, Stuart Ashen, Lee Harris, James Ed, Mike Siegler, Ed Reader, Russell Hugo, Ken Barraclough, Mark Johnson, Gerard Morris, Matt Lee, Paolo Leary, Graham Kamak, Scott Mitten, Nicole Ketchum, Mark Brooks, Ninth Demon, Peter Sidorn, Ludwig Holmstrom, John Ezell, Kit Leary, Elle O'Brien, Dave Parkinson, and Novel. Thank you all so much for your fantastic support. As usual, I love you all. Join us next time for another little wee video that I don't know what it'll be yet, but I'm sure it'll be fun. And with that, I will say, wherever you are, whoever you be, have a good one, take care, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.